Marvel's What If line of comics are some of their most entertaining. Usually condensed into one issue or even less, these stories let Marvel writers just twist events in any way they really want, leading to some really cool stories. But today on Top 10 Nerd, we are going to be talking about 10 Marvel What If stories you probably have never heard of before. Number 10, Norman Osborn with the Infinity Gauntlet. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers after the Civil War event, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Now, using the gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his own tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible and aggressive father from the past to show him all the things that he has accomplished in a really sad attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he never really had as a child and still doesn't even have it now. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little worse given the fact that it was kind of his father's fault that Norman even turned out this way. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, Norman finds out that the entire team has been destroyed. As Norman is trying to figure out what happened, it's revealed that Thanos has shown up to collect the gauntlet in his awesome Thanos fashion. Unfortunately, not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the gauntlet, and he is dispatched, but not before he warns Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who he will never get it from. His father. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by Norman and the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Osborn just kinda loses it, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space. Which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox, and he, and this world that he created, fade into nothing. Number 9, all the power, no responsibility. In this What If number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life all the way back when he first encountered him and canonically did nothing. That simple change of the story robs Peter of the lesson of great power means great responsibility, and instead he turns to a life in the public eye. Now as an actor, Peter turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation at almost any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a tiny little bit. I mean, it's cool to me, I don't know. It's really not that cool. When J. Jonah Jameson exposes him to the public though, we see quite a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man. Spider-Man threatens him and even eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite Peter when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. It's only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn the old power and responsibility thing. Number 8, what if Aunt May passed on instead of Uncle Ben? Ready to be depressed? Great, because in this What If story we are given a first-hand look at what happens to Peter if Aunt May was the one to lose her life instead of Uncle Ben. Peter, fueled by rage, goes after her killer and ends his life, but unexpectedly Uncle Ben shows up and he takes the fall for Peter, going to jail. Now, Peter is going through life with no real moral center to help guide him, and he hates the idea of being Spider-Man. He becomes a bit of a troubled kid, he goes to a juvenile prison, escapes, lives on the street, and when he is almost at his breaking point, he tries to break Uncle Ben out of prison. Now instead of going with him, Uncle Ben convinces Peter to make Aunt May proud. Peter takes it to heart, he fixes his life, he meets Mary Jane, he focuses on school, being a hero when the world really needs him, and eventually Ben gets out of prison on good behavior, and that's when we finally get the power and responsibility speech, which leads to Peter becoming Spider-Man more permanently, and with Uncle Ben as like a Spider-Man version of Bruce Wayne's Alfred. He goes on to become the hero that New York deserves. Nice. Number 7, intelligent design God Hulk. Most comic book readers, and especially fans of Marvel and the Hulk, know of the storyline where the Illuminati banished the Hulk from Earth to send him to another planet. Now he ended up crash landing on Sakaar and became a gladiator, turned liberator, turned ruler of the planet until his ship self-destructed, wiping out his family and bringing him back to Earth as one of the most powerful and angry versions of the Hulk ever. Well, in What If Planet Hulk, it ends up asking the question, what if the Illuminati's banishment had hit its original target? Because of an unforeseen anomaly and Bruce kind of losing his mind, in the main Marvel Universe, Hulk was thrown off of his original course, which is what got him wound up on Sakaar in the first place. In this story, Hulk lands on the incredibly peaceful and serene planet that he was intended to, and sure, he goes a bit ragey at first, but he eventually realizes the planet is inhabited by a race of peaceful tiny little creatures, and they're super cute. Over long periods of time, the Hulk helps this race to evolve and survive against the threats of this planet, and even become a thriving civilization kinda similar to humans. They end up viewing the Hulk as their god, and he basically acts as one, leading them to wealth and prosperity and keeping them safe. Number 6. The world knew Daredevil was blind. One day, when fighting against Electro with Spider-Man, Daredevil is unaffected by a blinding flare set off right in front of his face by Electro. Now this event kinda clues in Electro to the idea that maybe this Daredevil guy is kinda blind. And when Electro and Spider-Man ask Daredevil what color Electro's costume is, it kinda seals the deal. Electro lets the whole world know by leaking this info to the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man actually sorta makes fun of Daredevil, which is mean, saying it makes sense why he chose the yellow costume because he obviously couldn't see how bad it was. Damn, Spider-Man. The villains then begin to take advantage of this massive secret weakness for Daredevil, and while he is able to hold his own still, he eventually decides to undergo an experimental treatment that restores his sight but removes his super senses. Now, powerless, Matt Murdock and Karen Page get married and have a normal life, with Matt becoming the district attorney. So it did actually turn out pretty good in the end. Number 5. Dazzler, the Herald of Galactus. Dazzler in Marvel Comics is a super underrated mutant and mega pop star with the power to convert sound into light, which is pretty good for a musician, and especially so since she uses this power to literally dazzle people at her concerts, as well as fight bad guys with a surprising level of power and efficiency. Well, in What If number 33, Dazzler is chosen as the new Herald of Galactus, being apparently the only being who could retrieve the old Herald who had hidden himself in a black hole. Now Dazzler does this by using her light-based powers, and then Galactus just sends him back into the black hole as like a punishment, I think? It's kind of weird, but this is a What If comic, so just go with it. Dazzler was then given a huge boost with the power Cosmic, and for some reason, even with her new boosted up powers, she decides to keep the disco ball rollerblades. I don't know. She's actually really torn up about having to leave her world, but she does vow to at least do good by not letting Galactus eat inhabited planets, which Galactus actually obliges this time because it seems like he's kinda got the hots for Dazzler. I'm not joking, that's actually kind of the reason. There's a whole conflict with an armada, and then Galactus releases her to go back to Earth, which has been the victim of an apocalypse in her absence, and then she decides to go back to join him yet again as some kind of weird, twisted love story. It's really strange. Number 4. Thaddeus Hulk Ross. So it turns out that if Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross were the one to save Rick Jones from the Gamma Bomb all the way back when, and became irradiated and became the Hulk, he wouldn't last very long, like at all. That's what happens in What If General Ross had become the Hulk. Gamma affects everyone differently, as the Watcher tells us, and for the General, he immediately turned into a Hulk, but retained his intelligence only without being able to speak or handle the situations he was now in properly, like the intelligence was all internal. For example, he accidentally completely squashed Rick Jones. He stopped Igor, the Russian spy who caused the Gamma explosion, but caused untold damage in the process, and while fighting the military, he threw a tank that traveled all the way to the house of Betty Ross, his daughter. The tank he threw crushed the house with Betty inside. He then unknowingly went to find her, as she would be able to help him with the Hulk problem, but all he found was the result of what he had done, and a weeping Bruce Banner. Ross transforms back into his regular human form, which allows Bruce to end the life of this now tormented Ross. This one's kind of depressing. Sorry. Number 3. American Civil War Captain America. I've talked about this one a lot, and I'm sorry. The story of What If Captain America starts out with our Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes time displaced to the Civil War era. Bucky is the commander of their regiment, and he is not a good guy. Apart from being an unhealthy amount of racist, he has quite the lack of moral compass as well. Now our Steve Rogers here obviously starts out as his scrawny and less than impressive self, but with a heart of gold that shines through. Now after sustaining injuries from not following Bucky's dastardly orders, he is recovering in a nearby Union camp tended to by one Private Samuel Wilson, this timeline's version of the Falcon, taken in by the Shawnee tribe at a very young age. Sensing the goodness place in Steve's heart, Wilson bestows a kind of eagle animal spirit thing on Mr. Rogers that changes you on the outside to whatever you are on the inside, if that makes any sense. And this happens just as James Barnes bursts into their location to bring them down. Now the power of this ritual blasts Barnes away, and when he recovers, he has become the White Skull, with like literally, he's the skull. And Steve has become a mystical super soldier wielding a shield and sporting a headdress. Now he goes on to save presidents and wars and leave a lasting legacy of Captain and General Americas that continues all the way up until the modern day. Number 2. Ghost Stroller Rider. What If the Watcher was a stand-up comedian is honestly the what if comic that just keeps on giving. It's pretty awesome. There are tons of weird and wild parts in this comic, but for this point, there is a full page devoted to the question of what if the Ghost Rider had possessed someone other than Johnny Blaze. And of course, instead of finding some other able-bodied man or woman, a cigarette-smoking, leather vest-wearing comedian watcher shows us the spirit of vengeance inhabiting the body of an elderly woman in a wheelchair demanding warm milk, a rollerblade-wearing woman vowing to bring an end to disco, and an infant in a stroller. A big-headed goo goo gaga who will hunt for vengeance after it finds someone to change its diaper. And just to make it 10 times better, this wee bab is wielding a cat, swinging it around its head as it zooms around in its Hellfire stroller. I honestly can't make it up. It's actually on the page. And finally, in at number 1, it's heroic Dr. Doom. What would a good guy version of one of the strongest, most quotable, and most villainous villains in the pages of Marvel Comics look like? Well, other than the infamous Iron Man, in issue 22 of What If, we get to see just that. When the Victor Von Doom of this universe discovers Reed Richards looking over his experimental notes, uninvited in university, he diverts from the regular continuity, which normally sees Doom fly off into a rage and make Reed leave. Instead, Von Doom invites Reed Richards to help him out, which I think a true scientist would actually do. Now with Reed's help, Victor is able to contact his mother in the afterlife, and he learns of his royal blood. He trains in the advanced technology and mystical arts of an order of monks in Tibet and in the darkest places of sorcery, and is granted, instead of his classic armor, this really sweet golden armor, which is kind of evocative of like medieval knights, but also kind of like the Roman Empire a little bit. Or maybe that's just my male brain talking, I don't know. He uses his knowledge to free his mother's soul from the realm of Mephisto, and uses his technology and sorcery to free his kingdom from an oppressive ruler, and all goes really well. Until Mephisto comes back demanding the soul of his lover, Valeria, in exchange for the freedom of his people. Then he battles Mephisto once every year to try and save his love, similar to how he does the same for his mother in the normal continuity, only now he's widely seen as a hero. Coming in at number 10 is the tale of Ice Giant Thor. A perfect what-if tale. It's almost surprising that it wasn't done before this point. In What If Thor in 2018, we get the story of what if Thor was raised by frost giants instead of Loki being raised by Asgardians. Simple, but brilliant. Laufey, the king of the frost giants, defeats Odin in their battle so long ago. And just as Odin took the infant Loki, Laufey takes the kid Thor and raises him as his own. Loki is obviously here too, and like usual, they form a pretty tight bond as adoptive brothers, Loki and Thor. Unfortunately though, due to Thor's strength and skill in battle, not to mention his fondness for summoning the power of lightning, he is praised among the frost giants and by Laufey himself, who begins to completely forget Loki, his actual true son. Instead, Loki finds the captured Freya in the dungeons, and she teaches him how to use magic. Loki eventually busts her out of prison, and together they attempt to escape to Midgard. They go to the ruins of old Asgard and attempt to repair the Rainbow Bridge until Thor and Laufey show up. Loki ends the life of his father, while Thor unknowingly ends his mother with a blast from his giant ice hammer known as Ice Crusher. Thor almost takes out his brother as well, but at the last minute, he lets him go. Now we don't know what happens next, only that Loki went to Midgard, had kids and a family, and apparently became a hero. It ends on a rather sweet note, and I think that's lovely. Number 9, Fantastic Four as cosmonauts? Next, let's explore the what if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian. Well, for starters, their name is different. In fact, actually, they're pretty much all different. Now called the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudion Richards, the commie Reed Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming than having to stretch. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, is also on the team as Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin is also on the team, but he's still just Colossus and has all those powers, except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, his sister, Ilyana Rasputina, is also on the team, who seems to have the powers of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool. After the demise of Stalin in this history, the team is put under the KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of the team, is not okay with it, especially after he accidentally ended the life of Giant Man while on a mission. Widowmaker makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero team goes on to fight for freedom and equality, which is not at all how I thought the story would go, but hey, it's good. Number 8. Jane Foster becomes Thor. Now, thankfully, Jane Foster as Thor has happened in the true 616 continuity, and it was really awesome. But here, it's a little different in this What If story. Number 10, actually. It is Jane Foster who first picks up the hammer Mjolnir, not Donald Blake. In this story, Jane accompanies Dr. Blake on his trip to Norway, and when he drops his cane into a ravine in the original, she instead goes down there to get it for him. Striking the stick on the ground, just like Donald Blake would have, she becomes Thordis. Yes, Thordis. Unlike the modern interpretation, a female wielding Mjolnir gets an entirely new name in this What If. Wielding the power of Thor, Thordis fights off the Saturn Rock people and then turns the cane that she seems to have just stolen from Donald Blake into a hairbrush to better fit in with her feminine alter ego, I guess, because men don't use hairbrushes. She has pretty much the same adventures as Thor, but crucially, she is rejected by Odin for not being a man. Oh, and for some reason, Sif gets with Donald Blake, which is kind of weird. This tracks all the way up until the events of Ragnarok, when Odin decides to give the hammer back to Donald Blake because he can't accept Jane as Thor. And then, as thanks, he turns Jane into a different god and then marries her. It's kind of gross, it's kind of really strange, it's kind of uncomfortable, but luckily it's only a story that comes from asking the question, what if? Number 7, World War II Space Nick Fury. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it is instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discovered interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II we fight is more like space sector war between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space. And don't ask me to define where those areas are, because I cannot. I don't know how space works. As this is still set at the same general time as the regular World War II though, some of the same characters are going to be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. This story has new high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens, and it's a good bit of fun. We learn in the story that Admiral von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a master race. So it seems that in this alternate world we can master interstellar travel, but we still just can't accept each other for our differences yet. Damn, that's kind of realistic, ain't it? Number 6, Civil War Captain America. Honestly, I'm kind of a fan of this What If story, but it does have some strange moments and twists on characters that you might not expect. For example, the story starts out with our Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes time displaced to the Civil War era. Bucky is the commander of a regiment, and he is not a good guy. Apart from being an unhealthy amount of racist, he has quite the lack of moral compass. Our Steve, however, obviously starts out as his scrawny and less than impressive self, but with a heart that shines through as strong and good as gold. After sustaining injuries from not following his commander's orders, he is recovering in a nearby Union camp tended to by a Private Wilson, taken in by the Shawnee at a young age. Sensing the goodness in his heart, Wilson bestows a kind of eagle animal spirit on Mr. Rogers that makes you on the outside whatever you are on the inside. That's how he describes it. And this happens just as Bucky Barnes stumbles upon their location. The power of the ritual blasts away Barnes, and when we see his face again, he has become the White Skull. Which, I mean, you could just call him the Skull because skulls are white, but whatever. Steve, on the other hand, has become a mystical super soldier wielding a shield and sporting a headdress. It's insane. He goes on to save presidents, end the war, and leave a lasting legacy of Captain and General Americas that continues continues all the way to the modern day. Number 5. Barbarian Hulk. Alright, this one requires a bit of unpacking. So, in issue 23 of What If, the Incredible Hulk has fallen in love with a woman named Jarella, a green-skinned queen from the subatomic world of Kai, who was brought back to our world when the Hulk was unshrunk in the actual continuity. Now, this happens in regular continuity like I just said, but she is unfortunately laid to rest after sacrificing herself to save a boy from some rubble during a Hulk battle. In this story, however, Jarella lives, and the Hulk and her are shrunk again so they can go and live happily ever after on the subatomic level in the kingdom of Kai. Now, Kai, for some reason, takes a very medieval, Roman / just ancient in general approach to lifestyle, and Hulk, who now possesses his full intelligence, becomes king of the land alongside Jarella. Soon after that though, a dark plot by some dark gods and their dark minions rears its ugly head, and the Hulk, alongside a group of other subatomic barbaric heroes, goes to thwart them, facing off against a second Savage Hulk that came out of nowhere that seems to have been taken down in like 2 comic panels. It's really weird, and that's where it ends. I'm assuming Hulk just kind of stays on the subatomic level and never returns to Earth, living as a microscopic barbarian for the rest of his life. Probably the best thing for him, honestly. Number 4. Thanos. Okay, so bear with me here. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Now, using the gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible father from the past to show him the things that he has done in an attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he has never had and still doesn't, honestly. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little worse given the fact that it was his father's fault that Norman even turned out this way. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, the entire team has been wiped out. And as Norman is trying to figure out what happened, it's revealed that Thanos has shown up to collect the gauntlet in his awesome Thanos fashion. It's actually pretty sweet. Unfortunately though, not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the gauntlet, and he is dispatched. But not before he tells Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who will never give it to him. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Norman loses it, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space, which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox, and he, and this world that he created, fade into nothingness. So yes, Thanos is the hero here in a very, very weird way. Number 3, T'Challa Star-Lord. One of the better, if not weirder, episodes of Disney Plus's What If animated series revolves around a universe where instead of Peter Quill, it was actually Prince T'Challa of Wakanda who was abducted by the Ravagers all the way back in the day. T'Challa, as the new Star-Lord, convinced the Ravagers to become a Robin Hood-like group who steal from the rich and give it to the less fortunate. Under his leadership, they became icons, and they saved a lot of people, recruited and persuaded lots of heroes and villains to join the Ravagers to help the galaxy, one of which even being Thanos. T'Challa heard of the orb on Morag, the one from the beginning of the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and he goes there to retrieve it, being stopped by Korath the Pursuer just like Peter Quill was in the movie. Unlike Peter though, Korath actually recognizes T'Challa as Star-Lord, and he joins up as well. He saved Peter Quill from Ego, saved Drax's family, got Nebula and Thanos to reconnect, and even stole a device from the Collector that could terraform ecosystems and save entire planets from starvation caused by overpopulation. You know, the entire thing Thanos was trying to fix. He eventually joins the Guardians of the Multiverse to fight the insanely powered Ultron, but that's a story for a different time. Number 2, Spider Actor? In this What If number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life. That simple act robs Peter of the lesson of the responsibility of having great power, and instead he turns to a life in the public eye. Now, as an actor, Peter Parker turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation at almost any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a little bit, and that part is, I think that's like the cherry on top of this whole story. Now when JJ exposes him to the public though, we see a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man when he threatens him and even eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite him when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. And he's not really impressive in that team, he's just kind of there. It is only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn that old power and responsibility thing, and it all goes thumbs up from there. And finally, in at number 1, Intelligent Design God Hulk What If Planet Hulk. That's a long title. Most comic book readers, and especially fans of Marvel and the Hulk, know of the storyline where the Illuminati banished the Hulk from Earth to send him to another planet. He ended up crash landing on Sakaar and became a gladiator turned liberator turned ruler of the planet until his ship self-destructed, taking out his family and bringing him back to Earth with a vengeance that no guilty person was safe from. What if Planet Hulk ends up asking the question, what if the Illuminati's banishment had hit its original target? Now in this story, Hulk lands on an incredibly peaceful and serene planet. And sure, he goes a bit ragey at first because he just got banished from Earth, but he eventually realizes the planet is inhabited by a race of peaceful creatures. Little tiny peaceful creatures. Over long periods of time, the Hulk helps this race to evolve and become a thriving civilization. They end up viewing the Hulk as their god, and he basically acts as one that leads them to wealth and prosperity. It's one of the few Hulk stories that doesn't end in tears, and I'm more than happy to talk about that for that reason alone.
Number 10. What if Daredevil killed the Kingpin? That's exactly what happened in issue number 2 of the 1989 series. Following the events of Born Again in this alternate reality, Matt Murdock loses his mind, driven insane as a result of being tormented by Wilson Fisk, which honestly makes sense to me. I know I would be driven insane if all of that stuff happened to me. This causes Matt to take the fight directly to Kingpin, who he simply takes out by shooting him. After this detail is exposed, everyone is basically on his trail, including Punisher and Spider-Man. When Matt goes to beg for Richard Fisk, Wilson's son's, forgiveness, even Hobgoblin gets involved in this fray. While Matt ultimately dies in the fight protecting Richard from Hobgoblin, Richard, in an unexpected twist, ends up carrying on the Daredevil legacy. Which I guess shouldn't be too unexpected if you know about, 2099, where it's kind of what happens in 2099. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why don't you show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? Now, you'd think this would actually be one of the happier what if stories, considering when Spider-Man started out, this was actually like one of his dreams to join the FF team, but he was denied it. However, in this universe, they do decide to allow Spider-Man to join them, making his dreams come true, but it actually ends up worse than if they just refused him like they did in the main continuity. I also think that this first issue of What If is pretty important as it really sets the tone for what these hypothetical comic stories could be, a look into a much darker reality where not everything goes according to plan. But we don't have to really deal with the consequences long term because, these stories are like windows into other more distant worlds, so they don't affect our main world. We can kind of just see I wonder what that world would be like. Terrible? Yep. In issue number 1 of the first volume of What If, Spider-Man ends up joining the Fantastic Four team, which I believe they renamed themselves to the Fantastic Five. Still has a pretty good ring to it actually. When Susan Storm actually makes the suggestion that, maybe letting him join wouldn't be such a bad idea. So Sue is actually the one that kind of gets him on the team ultimately here. But in the end, this results in her feeling often left out, shunted from this team as a result of Spider-Man's impressive presence. He just completely outdoes Sue, so she feels pretty left out. This causes her in the end to choose to remain with Namor, ultimately leaving the Fantastic Five team, something for which Spider-Man blames himself and which leaves a massive hole in the team and a massive hole in Reed's heart. Number 8. What if Spider-Man became a murderer? This is maybe the brightest of the darkest what if stories that I have on this list, but it's still really dark, so hence why it's here, especially at the start here. In issue number 72 of the 1989 What If series, we answer the question, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? Dun dun dun! With him confronting the burglar who killed his Uncle Ben and losing control of his emotions, killing said burglar in turn. This, however, eats Peter up inside, and it isn't until Dr. Kurt Connors becomes the Lizard and decides to fess up to his own actions that Peter is actually inspired and is able to confess to the murder that he was responsible for and reveal that he is the one that's Spider-Man. He does some time, but thanks to him showing remorse, he only gets 5 years, and Aunt May is still waiting for him when he gets out with his costume. It's dark, but it's also kinda cute in the end, because I think one of his biggest concerns was that Aunt May would like never love him again, and she is upset, but she eventually gets over it, and she's like, well, you know, this is still my nephew, so kinda nice. Still terrible, but kinda nice. Number 7. What if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? This one actually comes to us from a comic titled What If?, starring Daredevil, the man without fear. But the question posed in the intro is, what if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? Which is that's why I named the point that. It might not seem as dark as some other tales in the what if category, but the intro literally also poses the question in this issue. What if we shed a little light on the dark side of the Marvel Universe? And the story definitely delivers there, I would say. Here, Matt's dad takes the dive for his son and earns the money needed to send him to law school. Sounds pretty good. There, Matt meets Elektra. Also sounds pretty good. The two have a love affair that ends when her father is killed and they're both unable to save him together. Okay, it's starting to turn kinda dark. She leaves and Matt is then forced to deal with his own family tragedy as his father ends up in the hospital after a hit in a fight leaves him comatose. Okay, it's getting darker. Unable to afford the bills, he drops out of school and himself becomes a fighter, but when he is asked to take a dive for a paycheck, he refuses. As punishment, his father is killed, and Elektra returns to encourage Matt to seek retribution. This is where it gets pretty dark, I would say. Matt basically goes after Wilson Fisk with his intention to do it his own way. Now, he doesn't want to kill him, but he just wants to expose him for his illegal business dealings, which is a very Matt Murdock approach, I would say. In the end, though, Elektra kills Fisk for Matt basically during this confrontation, and Matt chooses to incriminate himself in the murder because he feels guilty about Kingpin's death. Yikes. Number 6. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by a radioactive spider? This What If comic, issue number 7 from the original series from the 70s, actually has 3 stories in it. In one of them, Flash Thompson tries on the role of superhero as he ends up becoming the one fatefully bitten by the radioactive spider that day in the science lab on the student field trip. And if you're wondering, well, Amanda, you know, Flash Thompson actually has been a hero. I know he's been a hero in the main continuity, but I mean, in this reality, he's trying on the superhero role of Spider-Man. He becomes Spider-Man and does his best to be a great hero, but actually dies during his attempt to be one. Sad. He fights the Vulture, and it's during a battle in the sky where the Vulture successfully manages to kick Flash off of him that Flash's Spider-Man falls to the ground. Unable to find much in the way of cushion or slowing his descent, the fall does him in, and Peter Parker finds Spider-Man in the alleyway, unmasking him to recognize the face of Flash Thompson, the ire of his high school experience. Now acknowledging the fact that Flash was Spider-Man though, Peter seems to forget all about this as he actually mourns the loss of Thompson, which makes it even more sad. Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? One of my personal favorites and definitely a dark story. This one involves Spider-Man being fully overtaken by his black suit after Reed attempts to remove it. In the end, Peter is drained of his life energy by the suit, which does inevitably leave him. Prematurely aged by this process, he ends up dying of old age, with Black Cat being the one to get revenge for Peter by killing the symbiote for good. It also features a very sad scene between May and old Peter, who poses as a colleague of Peter's from the Daily Bugle and basically comes to tell Aunt May before he dies how much Peter loved her. This sad and tragic what-if tale comes from issue number 4 of the 1989 comic series, if you would like to revisit it, as I have. Number 4. What if the Hulk had killed Wolverine? This story comes to us from issue number 50 of the first volume of the Marvel What If series. Here, Wolverine and the Hulk fight, as, you know, is common, but this time, during their, what I believe is intended to be their first fight, Wolverine ends up dead. This is all because Hulk is being used as a pawn by Forge's powerful nemesis, the Adversary. Very creative name, the Adversary. I wonder what that guy's about. Is he an adversary? He certainly is. In the end, Hulk threatens the lives of pretty much all of the X-Men, but does not end up killing them all. Once the Adversary reveals himself, Hulk attacks him, weakening him briefly, just long enough for Forge and Storm to basically escape his clutches. They strike back against him, and with Forge managing to cast a spell to defeat the Adversary and basically seals the Adversary off in another realm, banishing him from their reality for good. Still, while there are survivors of this battle, when Hulk transforms back to Bruce Banner, Bruce is confronted with the fact that he has taken multiple lives during this rampage, and that pretty much breaks Bruce, so I would say this is pretty tragic. Number 3. What if the Punisher had killed Spider-Man? This comic has maybe one of the darkest endings around. In it, Punisher is tricked into killing Spider-Man. He's promised basically funds to help him in his fight against crime and those who took his family from him, and Frank is also made to believe that Spider-Man himself is a criminal and is not actually a hero. However, after killing Spider-Man, Frank learns the truth. He manages to track down the man who misguided him, the Jackal, aka Professor Miles Warren. He figures out that the Jackal is Warren, and insists that they wait for the cops instead of just, blowing Warren away. However, when the cops do arrive, it's revealed what Frank's real plan is here, to basically kill the Jackal in front of the cops and in return be killed by the cops, believing he deserves himself to be punished for what he did to poor Spider-Man. This all goes down in What If, issue number 58 from the 1989 series. Does seem like a Frank solution to a problem where he blames himself for something. Number 2. What if Flash Thompson became Spider-Man? I was kind of thinking that maybe in this story, Flash, might get a break here. But even here, he has a pretty bleak tale attached to him in another alternate reality where he also becomes Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker. The story culminates in a heated moment where Peter discovers Flash's secret, that he's Spider-Man. Filled with rage, Flash doesn't listen to Peter's pleas for help and instead blames him for everything that has gone wrong in his life recently, shouting at Peter, "You ruined my life," before hitting him with a deadly punch that basically cost Peter his life. This story comes from the 2018 What If Spider-Man comic, and I would recommend checking this one out. It's wild. Number 1. What if Phoenix had not died? The title for this story makes it sound like it might even be a positive and happy story, but don't be misguided, it's not happy. Well, it starts off pretty optimistic with the Phoenix not dying but being redeemed and even helping to defeat Galactus. In the end, the Dark Phoenix power does consume Jean, causing her to turn on her teammates, so she becomes, dark again. She kills not just the X-Men, but the world in her rage and sorrow, with her anger and fire continuing to spread outward, engulfing the universe. So not only do her friends die, the X-Men obviously, the world, but the universe is also completely endangered. So yeah. Number 10. Dr. Murrow. The interesting thing too about Dr. Murrow is that some spelling for this character is like Dr. Morrow, but if you actually look at the comic itself, it's Murrow with a U, so I believe it's Murrow with a U, but if you say Morrow and I say Murrow, that's also fine. I'm not gonna come for you. Dr. Murrow appears in the What If issue number 11 from the 1997 series. Here we answer the question, what if the Marvel bullpen had been transformed into the Fantastic Four? Being from a different time period, there are definitely some extremely sexist tones in this issue. A lot of it aimed sadly at Fabulous Flo Steinberg, who stands in for Invisible Woman. But another ridiculous aspect of this issue, aside from that more serious one, are some of the villains that we see the bullpen version of the FF face off against. Like their first villain, Dr. Murrow. Dr. Murrow's island was the one that they planned on visiting before they were delivered some fan mail. Upon opening it up, they found a mysterious radio-like device which transformed them into the Fantastic Four, granting them powers after they were exposed to cosmic rays that the device emitted. Turns out that this was all part of a Skrull plot, which we find out later in the issue, and that Dr. Murrow was also a victim of a similar device. Oh no. But even with that, why did he attack them when they got to his island? Why is he a villain in all this? Why is he one of the first villains we run into? Did the transformation make him, I don't know, just really mad or something? Or violent? The reality is they probably just wanted to start the issue off with a good fight and a bit of mystery, but still Murrow ends up being a pretty bizarre villain because of this. Because there's things that just aren't explained here. Oh well, I'm willing to come along for this strange ride in any What If. Number 9. Disappointed Loki. In the What If story, what if the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner, we get to see what would happen if the Hulk had kept Banner's wits and then ran into Loki's illusion, with the train tracks and such. Turns out this version of the Hulk was too smart to fall for Loki's trap. Seeing the TNT on the train tracks, but believing it to be an illusion, meant that he would never be put onto a collision course with the Avengers and therefore would never join that team. Instead, Loki ends up disappointed, and Banner goes on to fight against Galactus, joining with Professor X and Reed Richards to create the new and extremely powerful uni-being of X-Man. Poor Loki though, he's like, but I set this trap in. Alright. I guess not all traps are winners. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show some support for us on other platforms, head on over to Facebook, give us a like, give us a follow, it does help us out, and we're gonna have lots of exciting new content coming for you over there. Exciting. Number 8. Fake Captain America. Both weird and great in a lot of ways. Fake Captain America was William Burnside. Now, while William Burnside does exist in the 616 universe, where he was a well-meaning Captain America imposter driven mad by improper use of the super soldier serum, in the what-if reality of Earth 84444, he ended up becoming obsessed with communists, paranoid that they could be lurking around every corner, which is kind of what happened in the main continuity, but in this one, he's less like, oh no, it's just the super soldier serum, and more like he made some conscious choices here. Modeling America into less of a democracy under the name of Captain America, Burnside would be beaten back by the real Captain America, who in this story doesn't resurface until 1984, which means that Burnside has a lot of time to basically do harm to the American image and the influence of the nation's people. This warning story and the speech the real Cap gives at the end are both still pretty relevant today, which is why this is like a great issue, but also why it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how there's a lot of stuff in this that I feel like is still relevant, even though it's from 1984. Do we ever do new things, or does history just cycle in like some vicious loop? Probably that. Number 7. Colonel Bruce Banner. What if Bruce Banner was actually the monster and Hulk was just purely the good guy? Well, that is the question we dive into in issue 91 of the 1989 series. Here, Bruce Banner mistreats his wife, Betty Ross, who eventually becomes, of course, Betty Banner. Bruce is cruel and unkind, but after he is involved in a gamma radiation explosion, another half of him emerges, a glowing green, light-like figure who is gentle and kind and we know as Starman. Basically, this world's Hulk. And he was actually terrified of Bruce himself. Not only is this villain pretty interesting, unique, and strange, but the story is also like epically sad. Despite Betty reaching out for help to both her father and others around her, it seems that no one actually really believes Betty when it comes to the fact that like Bruce mistreats her. In the end, she is confined to a mental institution as she's believed to have gone insane. But at least there she appears to be safe from Bruce and his cruelty, so it's like a sad but I guess sort of happy ending. It's bittersweet is what it is. Ugh. Number 6. Mr. Fantastic. So, Mr. Fantastic in this story is still Reed Richards, but he's also Dr. Doom. Let me explain. In issue number 6 of the 1997 What If series, we get to explore an alternate world where the Fantastic Four were granted different powers. These powers seem to have been inspired more by their personality traits. As such, Reed Richards becomes a big brain. Literally, he's just a brain. Instead of him staying as a big disembodied brain though, with mental or psionic capacities, if you will, he ends up being convinced by Dr. Doom to go with him so that Doom might help him by using his knowledge of robotics to build him a humanoid body. You know that when Doom is like, please, let me help you, Reed Richards, that's not what's about to happen. In reality, Doom's plan is to use Reed's powerful brain form to power his time travel machine. The Fantastic Four come to save Reed and a battle ensues, eventually resulting in a massive explosion when Doom attempts to activate his machine. Just as the explosion goes off though, Reed manages to use his mental brain powers to move his mind into Doom's body. As a result, Doom, which I assume moves into Reed's brain form, ends up dead, and Reed lives on, but within the scarred body of Dr. Doom. So now it just looks like Doom is leading the FF. Pretty cool, but also pretty weird. Number 5. Space Admiral Von Strucker. In the What If story from issue number 14 of the 1977 series, we answer the question, what if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? Turns out that events would be, as expected, pretty weird. The whole premise is that on this alternate Earth, humans got to space a lot sooner and ended up being pulled into a conflict where they fought against the Baytans. Strucker himself was an admiral. Strucker would end up on the side of humanity, but would ultimately betray humankind and Earth to ally himself with the Baytans. He saw an opportunity for Germany, who he was more loyal to than, just Earth in general, even though, Germany's part of Earth, so I feel like maybe an interesting choice on his part. Basically, he believed that if the Baytans took over as their allies, Germany would be in a better place than they were now, so he decided to betray his fellow space soldiers, which actually I guess kinda does make sense considering everything that happened after World War I. Space wars are always fun and weird though, and this story and its antagonists are, of course, no exception. Number 4. Hypnofish. The Hypnofish that appears in What If issue number 1 from the 1977 series is actually a character that has appeared in the main continuity. A character? A type of fish? Whether there is only a single Hypnofish or more than one. This is a character who has only made a few appearances in even the main continuity since their first 616 appearance in 1963 in Fantastic Four issue number 14. But they also appear as Namor the Submariner's villainous ally in the first What If issue, where we answer the question, what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? The end result is that Namor successfully uses his hypnofish friend to kidnap Sue Storm, but instead of being rescued as she was in issue number 14 of FF, she ends up staying with Namor and ultimately becoming his queen, all because Spider-Man is on the team, which leaves her kind of feeling like isolated from them. In the end, his hypnofish and mentofish plot is successful, and Sue chooses to remain with Namor. Also, yes, there are also mentofish. That's a thing too. An even more rare thing than hypnofish, I believe. Number 3. Loki, Prince of Jotunheim. Another one of my favorite episodes from Marvel's and Disney Plus's What If series. For just how lighthearted and adorable it was one that asked the question, what if Thor were an only child? The answer was that Thor would basically be kind of a well-loved brat who was obsessed with partying as opposed to heroics. Not only did we get Party Thor in this episode though, we also got friendly frost giant Loki, who is also known of course as the Prince of Jotunheim. Instead of Loki being adopted by Odin and growing up to be the villain we normally know him as, the sort of jealous and vengeful brother of Thor, he becomes Thor's best friend and ally, who also seems to enjoy a good party. And I gotta say, I kinda love it. Super weird and super great. Number 2. Galactus. Galactus is a pretty complex character. Sometimes he's a villain, at times he's been a hero. Currently I'm pretty sure in the main continuity he's dead and his corpse is maybe being used as part of Thor's throne room, but either way, when it comes down to it, despite being a cosmic inevitability, Galactus often threatens entire worlds with his hunger, which, you know, it feels pretty villainous. And yet even he can end up with a happy ending where he gets to enjoy the simple life. All it takes is for Thanos to use the Infinity Gauntlet to wipe his mind and send him to Earth to live as a human. Hey, it's so easy. In this story, this attempt to neutralize Galactus results in him being recognized, despite his amnesia, as Elvis. This is because Galen in his human form happens to sound and look just like Elvis, coincidentally. When Adam Warlock finds him after defeating Thanos and offers to return Galactus to his prior form and power, he actually refuses and decides to live out his days on Earth with his new partner Gertrude and her son, basically filling in as the planet's, I guess, Elvis replacement following the mysterious death of the real Elvis. Which, I mean, fair enough. I mean, if I came to Earth and then people thought I was Elvis, I'd probably be like, you know what, I think I'm good. I'll just chill here. This is a pretty good life. Number 1. Juggernaut. In this bizarre what if issue, we asked the question, what if Professor X of the X-Men had become the Juggernaut? Which is a strange question and is also a great question. Obviously, instead of his brother Kane Marco. Obviously, who is normally the Juggernaut. This story takes place in the pages of issue 13 of the 1989 What If series. Here we see that Professor X is trapped under the rubble of the caved-in tomb where Sidorak's gem awaited an avatar. So Charles becomes the avatar of Sidorak and not only gains great physical power, but has his psychic mutant power basically increased as well. Because he was not around to form the X-Men, the Fantastic Four fight against Magneto in their place, which causes anti-mutant hysteria as a result. In response, when Juggernaut surfaces, he creates his own team of mutants to enforce anti-human laws in response. Woo! Becoming a powerful villain as opposed to friend and ally of humankind. Would have gone a lot differently.
Number 10. T'Challa Star-Lord. Have you ever seen the MCU's What If animated series? It is honestly really fun, and it has a great art style as well. But just like in the comics, it's the fun, possible scenarios of what if that are the star. One of the better, if not weirder, episodes revolves around a universe where instead of Peter Quill, it was Prince T'Challa of Wakanda who was abducted by the Ravagers all the way back in the day. T'Challa, as the new Star-Lord, convinced the Ravagers to become a Robin Hood-like group who steal from the rich and give to the less fortunate. Under his leadership, they became icons and they saved a lot of people, recruited and persuaded lots of heroes and villains to join the Ravagers, one of which even being Thanos. T'Challa heard of the orb on Morag, the one from the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy, and he goes to retrieve it, being stopped by Korath the Pursuer, just like Peter was. But unlike Peter though, Korath actually recognized T'Challa as Star-Lord and he joined up as well. He saved Peter Quill from Ego, saved Drax's family, got Nebula and Thanos to reconnect, and even stole a device from the Collector that could terraform ecosystems and save entire planets from starvation caused by overpopulation. That thing Thanos was trying to fix in the Avengers movies. He eventually joins the Guardians of the Multiverse to fight the insanely powered Ultron. It's pretty great. Number 9. Miles Morales becomes Wolverine. In this what if, we don't really get an explanation as to why, but instead of being his normal self, Miles Morales in this world is instead a mutant with the same abilities as Wolverine, and when he is younger, he is abducted alongside other children by Weapon X, who turn him into the adamantium skeleton super weapon, just like the alternate Wolverine, because of course that's what happens. Fast forward a few years though. Now in this world, Sentinels are being used to hunt down mutants by S.H.I.E.L.D. And after Miles takes out like 3 of them, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends this super cool looking warrior wielding an adamantium katana to take him out. This awesome S.H.I.E.L.D. warrior turns out to be Miles' father, and once he discovers this Wolverine mutant is his son, he turns on S.H.I.E.L.D. So, obviously they send another assassin, Miles' Uncle Aaron, who seems to be doomed to be bad no matter what because, you know, that's just how it goes. He is this world's version of Sabretooth. Miles' father defends his son to his dying breath until Miles jumps in to beat Sabretooth to a pulp and almost ends him too before his father convinces him to stop and to instead be a hero. And then the X-Men show up to recruit Miles, led by a professor who is Genki Lee, the original Miles' best friend for some reason. Yeah, I don't know, but this story is wild. You should check it out. Number 8. Wolverunisher. On the topic of Wolverine, what about the what if where Wolverine became a kind of Punisher? In this story, we were in 1920s Canada, following a Wolverine who doesn't seem to actually have claws, or if he does, he barely uses them. He does seem to have his healing factor and senses though. Whatever his powers are, he is still himself because we find out he has had a son with a lady who works at a bar. He is forced to take responsibility for them and makes friends with the barkeep, but that all comes to an end when they are all brought to an end thanks to a fire caused by a man named Scarface, who fled to Chicago. Obviously, Logan isn't going to let that go. He tracks down the villain, and with the help of one Matteo DePrigia, and all while wearing a skull and crossbones flag on his chest and wielding firearms, and basically never popping his claws, he actually takes his revenge on Scarface, and it's great. I mean, he looks totally amazing in this story, but it's also an incredibly weird twist on a version of Punisher and a version of Wolverine. Also, it's a little more disappointing than I expected it to be. Number 7. What if Aunt May died instead of Uncle Ben? Ready to be depressed? Great. Because in this what if story, we are given a first-hand look at what happens to Peter if Aunt May was the one to lose her life instead of Uncle Ben. Peter, fueled by rage, goes after her killer and ends his life, but unexpectedly, Uncle Ben shows up, and he takes the fall for Peter, going to jail. Now, Peter is going through life with no real moral center to help guide him, and he hates the idea of being Spider-Man. He becomes a bit of a troubled kid. He goes to juvenile prison, escapes, lives on the street, and when he is almost at his breaking point, he tries to break Uncle Ben out of prison. Instead of going with him though, Uncle Ben convinces Peter to make Aunt May proud. Peter takes it to heart. He fixes his life. He meets Mary Jane. He focuses on school, being a hero when the world really needs him, and eventually Ben gets out of prison on good behavior. And that's when we finally get the power and responsibility speech, which leads to Peter becoming Spider-Man more permanently. And with Uncle Ben as a Spider-Man version of Bruce Wayne's Alfred, he goes on to become the hero New York deserves. Number 6. Thaddeus Hulk Ross. So it turns out that if Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross were the one to save Rick Jones from the Gamma Bomb and become irradiated and become the Hulk, he wouldn't last very long at all. That's what happens in What If General Ross had become the Hulk. Gamma affects everyone differently, as the Watcher tells us, and for the General, he immediately turns into a Hulk, but retained his intelligence only without being able to properly speak or really handle the situations he was now in properly. For example, he accidentally completely squashed Rick Jones. He stopped Igor, the Russian spy who caused the Gamma explosion, but also caused untold damage in the process. And after fighting the military, it turns out he threw a tank that traveled all the way to the house of Betty Ross' daughter. The tank he threw crushed the house with Betty inside. He went to find her as she would be the only one who's able to actually help him in this situation that he's in, and instead all he found was the result of what he had done, and a weeping Bruce Banner. Ross transforms back into his regular form, which allows Bruce to pull out a weapon and end the life of this now tormented Ross. I'm sorry, I know this didn't end on a particularly happy note. This is, I guess, the more depressing story than that Spider-Man one. Number 5. Ghost Rider. Honestly, not even sure how this makes sense. But in this What If comic, Marvel, the comic company, exists as a comic book company that writes all the same comics it normally would, including comic books about Ghost Rider Robbie Reyes, who also happens to be an intern at Marvel in this story, but is also still Ghost Rider. Look, I never said that these things had to make sense, okay? What is honestly even weirder is that the studios of Marvel are being visited by this Nordic death metal band called Hassenwald from Latveria, who have fun clubs all over the world, including in Wakanda. Oh, and they also have been accused of witchcraft, church burning, and eating people. It turns out to all be true, as while they are visiting Marvel, they sacrifice the donkey who runs the printing press and use its blood to create possessed Ghost Rider comics that turn the world into a hellscape, making them the ultimate rulers of it using the power of the old gods to do so. Now, Robbie Reyes is trapped in this hellscape world where Hassenwald has dispatched the Marvel Universe and he needs to save it. Number 4. Magneto in cyberspace. From one utterly bonkers story to another. At least this one's a bit better. In What If X-Men, we have a really strange alternate world. A post-apocalyptic one, but one that's gone completely digital, and humanity's mutations lie in their internet connection rather than in their DNA, with mutants having the EXE gene instead of the X gene. This issue follows two very different versions of Domino and Cable as they are tasked by Xavier to rescue Eric, aka Magneto, a digital entrepreneur taken hostage. Except he isn't a good guy. Surprise. No, he is actually masterminding a whole digital coup, but using his powers and Domino, Xavier connects to Eric, takes over his body and mind, and erases him from cyber existence. At least that's what I gathered when I was reading it. I really have no idea what the heck is happening here. It's really strange, but you should definitely check it out. Number 3. Iron Man the Traitor? In one of the first ever What Ifs, when Iron Man is famously captured and forced to create weapons, he still creates the Iron Man armor. But the change comes when instead of booting up and busting his way out of there, he is held captive. The boot up sequence takes too long, and Jensen's sacrifice doesn't buy him enough time. Tony is found and restrained before he can do anything. Now that he has been found and this new weapon, the Iron Man armor, is discovered, the leader of the terror organization, Chen Lu, plants a device in the arc reactor that keeps Tony alive that allows him to shut it off remotely if Tony doesn't do what they say. And he implants a communication device in Tony's skull so that Chen Lu can spy on and control Tony. Then he lets him be discovered and he goes back to being like normal Tony Stark. But thanks to the fact that he can now control Tony, he forces him to become a hero, like he would have anyways, gain the trust of the superhero community, and then learn secrets pertaining to S.H.I.E.L.D. But it's once Tony is ordered to dispatch Reed Richards and goes to complete the mission that it's revealed that Tony had been recording a tape by speaking incredibly slowly, and he sent that tape to Reed, who, when he played it at a faster speed, learned of the situation Iron Man was in. So once their fight began, Iron Man eventually got incapacitated by Reed, who actually helped him remove the device inside Tony's heart, giving Tony the chance to get his revenge. It's kind of a weird way of doing that. Number 2. New Fantastic Four. What If This Was the Fantastic Four is a comic that was a tribute to illustrator Mike Wieringo, who unexpectedly passed away while working on this story. And even if that wasn't the case, it is still one of my favorite what ifs. The original Fantastic Four is brought to an end by the Skrull agent Delilah, and in their place, a team of 4 heroes step up to the plate, if not with a bit of reluctance. Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Incredible Hulk, and Ghost Rider. Ben Grimm was the only member of the original team who survived, and at their funeral, he gave this new team his blessing while he went off to raise Franklin Richards. This new team came under attack from cosmic beings who seemed to sense the Earth losing one of its major teams. But this was all orchestrated by Dr. Doom, as I'm sure no one is surprised by. Thanks to Ghost Rider's inclusion on the team though, Mephisto uses Doom and possesses him, and creates a team of the hero's villains who are power boosted with infernal magic. So Venom, Abomination, Sabretooth, and Sandman. This fearsome four, as they call themselves, do battle with the new team, eventually being defeated, revealing the Mephisto-possessed Doom, who almost destroys the team until he is stopped by a combined effort of the citizens of New York and Spider-Man utilizing the Disruptor that finish off the Fantastic Four to save the people of New York, Dr. Doom, and the day. Nice. Number 1. Thanos. Okay, so bear with me here. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Using the gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible father from the past to show him the things he has done in an attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he never had and still doesn't. honestly. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little sadder given the fact that it was his fault Norman even turned out this way in the first place. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, the entire team has been destroyed. As Norman is trying to figure out exactly what has happened here, it's revealed that Thanos is the one who's done it, and he's shown up to collect the gauntlet. Thanos is incredibly awesome, but unfortunately not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, and he is dispatched, but not before he tells Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who will never give it to him. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Norman loses his mind, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space, which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox, and he and this world he created fade into emptiness. So yes, Thanos is the hero here in a very weird roundabout way.
Leapfrog. This spring-loaded villain appears in the What If that has Aunt May gaining Spider-Man's powers instead of Peter Parker. And before you jump down my throat, Leapfrog does appear in other comics first, I know this, actually first showing up in Daredevil number 25, but this iteration of the character is clearly meant to be more slapstick and ridiculous than he normally is, which is saying a lot, considering this must be one of the silliest villains in Marvel. But case in point, his first appearance in this What If issue shows him crashing through a brick wall and just swearing at everybody, screaming expletives as he bounces past a group of civilians and a news reporter. He ends up in a battle with Aunt May's Spider-Woman and gets thwarted by nothing other than a stretchy mass of dough that Aunt May uses to lasso him into a tree. He's just clearly such a dumb villain and appears for what I could only imagine was comedic value to the already hysterical What If issue.
Number 9. Ghost Grandpa. While technically Ghost Riders are supposed to be heroes, this one doesn't seem to be too nice in terms of the brief glimpse that we see of him. And it's because of that I decided to include him as a kind of like a low-key villain. Ghost Grandpa makes his appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34, where we ask the question, what if Ghost Rider had possessed someone else? Instead of Johnny Blaze, of course. The answer allows us to take a look at a few different candidates, including Ghost Skater and Ghost Baby, but while both talk about punishing evildoers and getting vengeance, Ghost Grandpa only seems to be interested in getting revenge on his nurse for delaying his glass of warm milk.
Number 8 is Wolverine, Lord of Vampires. This villain is bizarre because it's the embodiment of a character we've all known forever, but who doesn't really exhibit any of his typical traits. In What If number 24, Wolverine takes on the Lord of Vampires, who tries to bite him to turn Wolverine into a vampire himself. And since Wolverine was too badass to simply be turned into a vampire, he decides it's only in his character to kill the guy. And he does, but what happens when you kill the Lord of Vampires is that you take on the title yourself. And this is when Wolverine starts to change into a very strange version of himself. Right away, Wolverine starts turning his former friends into vampires, with his demeanor totally shifting as he uses like mind control powers on them, which is just pretty strange on its own. Honestly, this is what it is. It's just weird seeing Wolverine without any level of humanity in him anymore. Something about this transformation doesn't seem right and gives me some very conflicting feelings towards the whole thing. Although I gotta say, he does turn out to be pretty powerful Lord of Vampires. He even takes out Doctor Strange in a harrowing battle, which says a lot for Wolverine on its own. This suggests that his power level is pretty heavily increased after getting the title of Lord of Vampires. Doesn't change the pop collar and bat-eared hairdo though. This is a list about weird villains, not powerful ones. Although he might end up on both, he still ranks on this one for sure. I mean, just look at him.
Number 7. Maggie Nito. Maggie Nito appears in a humor issue of What If. She's the one who terrorizes poor old styrofoam skeleton Wolverine. She's technically supposed to be the female child version of Magneto, who is known in the comics for ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine over the course of a few horrifying panels of comics. Maggie Nito, on the other hand, doesn't need any powers to hurt her version of Wolverine, who is much more cowardly in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. Which, I mean, makes sense, considering he literally has a styrofoam skeleton. I mean, I would be afraid of Maggie Nito too, if I had a styrofoam skeleton. Also, just in general, she seems like a mean little girl.
Danger. This villain is definitely a weird one. It's basically just the humanoid form of the Danger Room, a highly sophisticated computer interface that the X-Men used to train. But in 2009's astonishing X-Men number 9, the Danger Room comes to life and takes on a humanoid form that calls itself Danger. Although I know this isn't a What If issue, in 2010's What If Astonishing X-Men #1, Danger gets a more focused storyline and it's even weirder than you might expect. Basically, Ultron somehow catches wind that Danger has come to life and falls in love with her. They become a couple and go on a murder spree, killing all the X-Men and then eventually Professor X himself. Then they take to the cosmos and continue to kill all the organic life forms in their path, until they finally establish their own intergalactic empire. It's later pondered by the Watcher that if Professor X had only listened to Danger when she declared that she had gained sentience, she wouldn't have been so inclined to take him down. It's sort of a cool message about the dangers of AI, but first and foremost, it's just a weird antagonist in this What If issue. The Danger Room gets married to Ultron. It doesn't get much weirder than that, I don't think.
Number 5. Thanos. Another one of my favorites has to come from the What If Disney Plus streaming show, where we actually got to see what Thanos would be like if he were on the side of good. So technically here, I guess he's a hero, but of course in the main continuity we know him better as a villain, both in the comics and the MCU, so yeah. Thanos ends up joining the Ravagers and becoming a close ally of Star-Lord in episode 2 of the show, where we get to explore what the world would be like if T'Challa, instead of Peter Quill, ended up as Star-Lord. And guess what? Turns out the world would potentially be a lot better for it, minus the imminent doom of the universe as a result of Ego's plot to kind of like take it over, but ignoring that. Other than that, it was doing pretty well for itself, I gotta say. Thanos didn't even snap half the universe out of existence in this reality, and all because T'Challa convinced him not to do so by simply talking him down. Man, where was Black Panther when that was happening before? Why didn't he just come in and be like, hey, look, Thanos, no. Maybe he's got to travel in space before he can have those conversational skills. Maybe that's why.
At number 4 is Cable. So in this 2-part What If issue, Cable is the bad guy and he actually kills his parents, Cyclops and Jean Grey, as well as Professor X. Professor X seems to be getting a lot of heat on this list. And even though this is a what if and basically anything goes, it's just a really bizarre call to have part of the X-Men family travel through time to kill his parents and their noble mentor Charles Xavier. This naturally doesn't go unnoticed and actually starts an all-out war between the X-Men and the X-Force. And while these two groups are duking it out, Magneto takes the opportunity to take control of Washington, D.C., which segues into that second part I mentioned, aptly named What If Magneto Took Over the USA. But regardless, this just made me feel weird to see a character we're used to seeing as a hero just take a sudden turn to evil, so much to the point where he kills his own flesh and blood in a brutal massacre. And why? Well, they have some differences in ideology, but why does that matter if they're in the past? Couldn't Cable have just stayed in his own time and believed in stuff over there? Although he's not really known to stay in his own time very often. It's just that he normally does it for good instead of doing it to start a massive war that ends in Sentinels dropping nukes on Washington and killing everyone. I don't know, was it worth it, Cable? Check out the issue and see if you think.
Number 3, Elektra. Elektra makes an appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34. This being a humor issue, we get to take a look at what might have happened had Elektra survived her run-in with Bullseye. Even though Elektra at this time was depicted as a villain, or, you know, at least an extremely edgy anti-hero, it seems that this one-panel take on the character has her reconsider her life of crime as a result of her near-death experience. This is pretty weird, considering I'm pretty sure at this point Elektra would have had already a few near-death experiences in her line of work as an assassin. So, like, unless she knew she was going to die here and then that's not what happened, but I feel like for her this is just an average Tuesday. Elektra even goes so far as to consider settling down and getting married, and I quote, or something. What is or something? Also, Elektra getting married just because she didn't die from Bullseye fighting her? Wow, that just seems a little unbelievable. Anything can happen in an alternate reality.
Number 2 is Dazzler. In What If number 33, the question is asked, what if Dazzler had become the Herald of Galactus? These days, Dazzler is known to be a relatively stagnant member of the X-Men and doesn't usually get a lot of mention in the mainstream. Sorry, Amanda. Amanda really likes Dazzler. However, in the 80s, it was a totally different story. Right before this issue of What If in 1981, Dazzler is taken on by Galactus as his herald, but only to complete a quick mission to retrieve his original herald. Then she goes back home. But fast forward 1 year later to 1982, And in this what if, the situation is revisited again, but in this case, she stays as this Herald and actually becomes one of the most powerful villains in all the cosmos. The Herald of Galactus is an individual imbued with part of Galactus' power cosmic, and their job is to fly around the cosmos and look for planets for Galactus to consume. So it's a pretty big deal to be given the title of Herald, both for the one who's selected and for the people of the cosmos, because if you're doing your job right as a Herald, you'd best believe you're ruining and ending the lives of countless others. So, for Dazzler, of all the heroes to be taken in by Galactus and given this responsibility, it just leaves me with a weird feeling in my gut. Like, why would a character that barely wants to be a hero and only really wants to sing, like why would they take on the job of Herald of Galactus? The answer does lie in this issue, but it's still a bit confusing and maybe a bit out of character for Dazzler, which is why I put it at number 2.
Number 1. Susie Richards. In issue number 30 of the 1989 What If series, Susie, Reed and Sue's second child, becomes the villain. Susie is obviously meant to be a stand-in for Valeria Richards, who we have now, their daughter, who has a weird history where she was kind of both the oldest and then like the youngest child of the fantastic duo. It's confusing, but don't worry about it. In this version of the story, she is most definitely just the younger, but despite being the younger sibling between her and Franklin, she still terrifies her brother, who in the main continuity was once known for insanely powerful reality warping abilities. Although I don't think he has those in this reality. But anyways, you know you're scary when you're scaring Franklin. Even a young Franklin. Susie is an evil little girl who it turns out was possessed by a hellspawn that came from the negative zone. In the end, Franklin is forced to fight and defeat her, but unfortunately all too late, as the rest of his family has already been killed by her. Even Dr. Doom doesn't stand a chance against the possessed Susie. Poor Franklin, he warned everyone, but they didn't listen.
Professor X as Juggernaut. In What If number 13, the question is posed, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? And the answer is, it would make Ben Ball feel uncomfortable. This mashup is maybe a little tough to justify for this list since it's about superheroes, and in this story Professor X, or not, does enlist all of the mutants to take over the world, but it's still Professor X in there somewhere, and it's arguable that he may have been turned from good to evil by the influence of the Sidorak gem. I just had to put this strange character on the list because I think it's such a weird combination to even consider, let alone craft a whole issue around. Look at him. Chonky, fully mobile Professor X. When he puts the helmet on, things are less weird though, but it's still one for the list.
Number 9. Wolverwimp. Wolverwimp is an alternate version of Wolverine who, instead of having an adamantium skeleton, has a styrofoam one. He appears in one of the joke covers included in issue 100 of What If. This poor version of Wolverine is threatened by a little girl who is a female child version of Magneto. Yeah, it's weird. While Wolverine is fearsome and tends to fight for what he believes in no matter the odds, it seems that Wolverwimp is all too ready to shy away from a fight as he's terrified of a conflict. Honestly, I really can't blame the poor guy. He is a styrofoam skeleton, so yeah, I don't even know how you'd walk around with that, never mind trying to be a hero and like stand up to bad guys. Probably just like crumple over.
Frog Thor, or Throg. There's not much more to it than that. The question posed in this issue is, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? It really has nothing to do with Frog Thor, but he makes an epic appearance nonetheless. The transformation actually takes place in Thor number 363 and is revisited in this What If issue. If you don't already know, or couldn't already have guessed, Thor's slimy amphibian form comes at the hands of his brother Loki. What makes this moment great in What If number 12 though is that Storm is forced to face off against Frog Thor, with the stakes being the prosperity of all of Asgard. Luckily, she wins the fight and Frog Thor is turned back into regular Thor. Although, is that really a win? I liked Frog Thor. If you want to see more of Throg, you can catch him in another storyline as well, where a shard of Thor's hammer is actually picked up by a frog, turning it into a pretty powerful little dude. I just thought that was worth mentioning as well. Frog Thor.
Number 7. Joshua Guthrie and Unit Gem 211131. This is actually a pretty sad story, but one that is also kind of silly. It's basically reminiscent of the Iron Giant. Remember the Iron Giant? Remember all the tears that we cried? Except instead of any old giant robot, we have a Sentinel. Unit Gem 211131. This Sentinel is found by Josh Guthrie, little sibling to Husk and Cannonball, who never has his mutant powers manifest. In this world anyways. On our 616, Josh ends up getting wings and musical mutant abilities, going by the codename Icarus. Here, however, he just gets a Sentinel, who has broken programming and instead believes his prime directive is basically to protect protect and serve Josh. However, he still remembers that mutants are a threat, and when he meets Paige and Sam Guthrie, ends up battling against them, while painted up like an X-Men. Josh's idea, because he wanted to prove that he and his robot were basically a better team than the X-Men ever could be. Oh boy. Paige and Sam end up beaten by the Sentinel, but just as it's about to terminate the defeated mutants, oh no! Josh steps in to protect his siblings. He says that the Sentinel can't kill them without killing him as well. As such, the robot realizes it is the main threat to Josh and decides to terminate itself instead in order to protect him, because that's its prime directive at this point. Sure, Sentinels are kind of villains, but in this story, in a roundabout way, Unit Jim 211131 is actually kind of the hero. Although he threatens Paige and Sam and Josh, he also ends up saving them from himself. I don't know why I made the Sentinel a he, but the Sentinel's a he now, because I'm not going to go back. I gave the Sentinel a gender. I hope that's okay. Josh mourns the loss of his robo friend, and it is ultra sad. Just like Iron Giant.
Thanos Captain America. In What If Infinity Thanos, the question is posed, what if Thanos joined the Avengers? And the result is this really strange depiction of Thanos wearing a Captain America suit. What goes on in this storyline is that Thanos joins up with the Avengers to fight the Builders, and he doesn't even try to take over the world or try and kill half the population or anything like that. That is until Captain America is killed and Thanos takes over for him. Because then he decides it's time to start taking over stuff again. After he helps the Avengers destroy the Builders with a swift battle, he goes back to his classic Thanos self and makes it his duty to take on Cap's old position as leader. And then quickly makes it his duty as well to lead the Avengers and the rest of the heroes of Earth into war with the rest of the universe. So yeah, he doesn't take over Earth, but he seems to be ready to help them take over other worlds alongside him. Fair compromise? I guess so. Either way, the cover of this issue just feels so weird, and I felt that Captain America Thanos needed to make an appearance on this list.
Number 5. Actual Black Widow. Black Widow in issue 34 of What If gets her own little mini comic taking up a third of a page. It's really kind of like just a panel. It answers the question, what if Spider-Man had married the Black Widow? Well, it wouldn't end well apparently. The joke is based on what Black Widows are known to do to their mates in nature. Female Black Widows, that is. In nature, they eat their mates, hence why in this comic, Spider-Man doesn't fare too well. The implication is that Black Widow actually eats Peter here. We see her picking her teeth, looking quite content and burping, while behind her Spider-Man's suit looks pretty deflated with bones poking out of it and littered around it. So yeah.
You. Yes, you. In this issue of What If, the question is posed, what if you were Spider-Man? They start with a panel of Spider-Man swinging Mary Jane to safety, and they even encourage you to paste a picture of your own face over Spider-Man's to make it even more immersive. But moving forward, this issue doesn't really take much time to explore that question before absolutely roasting you beyond words. The very next panel shows a big group of all of Spider-Man's villains standing in a graveyard, pointing and laughing at a gravestone that reads, "Here lies, fill in your name here," and in big bold letters says, "You'd be dead, you're no superhero." So mean, but also very funny. I thought this was a great one to include because as much as Marvel is known for their meta commentary, this is just on a whole different level.
Number 3. Galen. Galactus may be better known as a villain in the Marvel Universe, the main Marvel Universe, or at least a powerful antagonist if you will, but in the What If reality of Earth 92201, he's actually better known for being a sort of everyday hero, if you will. When Galen as Galactus ends up in battle against Thanos, who wields the Infinity Gauntlet, he ends up defeated, being transformed into an amnesiac human left on planet Earth. When found, it just so happens that Galen's voice and appearance greatly resembled that of a young Elvis. People believed he was Elvis returned, positing that Elvis never really died. Galen even ends up believing he is Elvis and finds happiness on Earth with a woman named Gertrude and her son Tony. Warlock finds Galen and offers to turn him back into his form of Galactus, but Galen is actually so happy he chooses to remain on Earth and continue living as Earth's Elvis replacement, basically. It's a great story.
Stan Lee and the original Marvel bullpen as the Fantastic Four. Naturally, this issue poses the question, what if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? And what we see is a version of Mr. Fantastic with the likeness of Stan Lee, which is just so fun. and bizarre. Jack Kirby, Flo Steinberg, and Saul Brodsky also appear as the other three, and they have themselves a fun, very original adventure as the popular titular heroes. Unfortunately, this issue apparently has some pretty sexist overtones, mostly aimed at Steinberg, which makes the Marvel creators come off as sort of unlikable, especially by today's standards. But regardless, it's a lot of fun to see the people behind the scenes of many of our favorite comics in the forefront of this unique issue of What If.
Number 1, Sheep Boy. When it comes to characters that really stick out to me in the world of Marvel What If, I gotta say a lot of them come from the funny little bits of the comics that aren't even full issues. Because come on, they're so wonderfully ridiculous. One such example at one such point, I guess, is the notorious Sheep Boy. Sheep Boy made his first appearance in What If issue 100. He was created by Jim Chung and is the reimagined version of Spider-Man. Basically, what if Peter Parker had been bit by a radioactive sheep instead? What would we get? Sheep Boy, which would really make for an interesting clone saga when it comes to figuring out the cloning process. Because, aren't we like all about sheeps when it comes to cloning? Actually, I think that through cloning sheep, we actually learned that cloning humans would be ill-advised. So maybe there'd be no more clones in the Marvel Universe if it started with sheep. No more clone sagas after that. I don't know if that would be good or bad. Depends on how much you like or dislike clones, I guess.
Number 10. Johnny becomes a living robot. We have talked about 1977's What If number 6. It's the one where the Fantastic Four have different powers. Where Reed becomes a brain and Ben Grimm gains dragon wings. That one. Sue Storm gets the most boring power, just taking on Reed Richards' stretching ability, but Johnny got a power that doesn't really make sense to me. Growing extra limbs or losing your body, minus your brain, and being human rubber doesn't really make sense either. But how the cosmic rays converted Johnny into a mechanical living robot with metal parts that calls himself Mandroid, I'll never know. Johnny is now forever a living robot and can control other forms of technology. He's also eternally a metal version of himself, which is honestly pretty good for a guy who loves his looks, because they'll never change. He's still a hothead though, so there's that. Number 9. WW2 Space Nick Fury. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it is instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discover interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II we fight is more like Space Sector War, between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space. Don't ask me to define where those sectors are, I cannot. As this is still set at the same general time as regular WW2, some of these same characters are going to be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. New high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens. It's a good bit of fun. We learn in the story that Admiral Von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a master race. So it seems we can master interstellar travel, but we still can't just accept each other's differences yet. Who put some reality in my comic book? Number 8. Thor, Herald of Galactus. Yes, the terrifying thought of someone as powerful as Thor becoming the Herald of Galactus is a strange thought, if only because it's so troubling. In this What If, Thor beats the ever-living heck out of the female Silver Surfer, who is the Herald of Galactus as he attacks Asgard, after she mortally wounds Sif. Seeing just how powerful Thor and his hammer are, Galactus stops the fight and offers Thor a place as his herald. Now, Thor initially says no, as we'd expect, and goes to keep fighting Galactus, but when the big purple dude points out that Asgard is in pretty bad shape, Thor takes one look, drops his hammer, and accepts. Just like that. Now, Thor makes a pretty awesome looking herald, even in the odd style of the comic, choosing the most fearsome and brutal worlds to feed to the World Eater, and sparing the weaker innocent worlds, again, as we'd expect. When Thor hears of Asgard being ruled over by Loki though, who de-lifed Odin and left Asgard in ruins, he takes some time from heralding to deal with his brother. Rediscovering his hammer and wielding it alongside the power cosmic, Thor becomes extremely powerful. Freeing his imprisoned friends and giving up Asgard for Galactus to feast upon, he destroys Loki and his frost giants and remains as the Herald of Galactus, saving innocent worlds from his destruction. Awesome. Number 7. Civil War Captain America. Honestly, I'm kind of a fan of this what if story, but it does have some strange moments and twists on characters you might not expect. For example, the story starts out with our Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes time displaced to the Civil War era. Bucky is the commander of the regiment and he is not a good guy. Apart from being an unhealthy amount of racist, he has quite the lack of moral compass. Our Steve obviously starts out as his scrawny and less than impressive self, but with a heart that shines through as strong and good. After sustaining injuries from not following his commander's orders, he is recovering in a nearby Union camp tended to by a Private Wilson, taken in by the Shawnee at a young age. Sensing the goodness in his heart, Wilson bestows a kind of eagle animal spirit on Mr. Rogers that makes you on the outside whatever you are on the inside. And this happens just as Barnes stumbles upon their location. The power of the ritual blasts Barnes away, and when we see his face, he has become the White Skull, which, I mean, you could just call him Skull, because skulls are white, you know, but whatever. And Steve has become a mystical super soldier, wielding a shield and sporting a headdress. He goes on to save presidents and leaves a lasting legacy of Captain and General Americas that continues all the way to the modern day. It's pretty sweet. Number 6. Spider-Man Punisher. On Earth 71928, or the What If Peter Parker Became the Punisher story, Peter's life remained pretty much the same as Earth 616 Peter. That is, until Uncle Ben's life was drawn to a close, and in response, Peter dispatched the robber who did the deed. In a very Punisher-like decision, Peter decided to deal with crime from this point on by any means necessary, meaning he started de-lifing criminals. Peter tried to avoid this at first, trying to go his normal route, but since criminals are criminals, and they always come back, and he knows how much easier of a solution it is to just take them out Punisher style, he went full force into that lifestyle. The easy solution, in my opinion, is not the heroic solution, but hey, that's how it goes. He carried the blam blam that took out Uncle Ben's life, as well as other weaponry and multiple different types of ammunition. His suit also took a skull logo instead of the traditional spider logo. Not because they want him to look like the Punisher, but due to the fact that the spider that gave him his powers was a noble false widow, which has a cephalothorax that looks like a skull. That's the reason. Not because the Punisher. Stop. Stop, he's not the Punisher, stop. Number 5. What if Ghost Rider was a baby? I know we keep pulling from this one, but that damn What If the Watcher was a stand-up comedian, What If comic, it's honestly the gift that just keeps on giving. There is a full page devoted to the question of what if the Ghost Rider had possessed someone else, someone other than Johnny Blaze. And of course, instead of finding some other able-bodied man or woman, a cigarette-smoking, leather vest-wearing Watcher shows us the spirit of vengeance inhabiting the body of an elderly woman in a wheelchair demanding warm milk, a rollerblade-wearing woman vowing to bring an end to disco, and an infant in a stroller. A big-headed goo-goo gaga who will hunt for vengeance after it finds someone to change its diaper. And just to make it 10 times better, this wee bab is wielding a cat, swinging around its head as it zooms around its Hellfire stroller. I can't make this up. I honestly can't. Number 4. Barbarian Hulk. Alright, this one requires a bit of unpacking. So, in issue 23 of What If, the Incredible Hulk has fallen in love with a woman named Jarella, a green-skinned queen from the subatomic world of Kai, who was brought back to our world when the Hulk was unshrunk. In regular continuity, she is laid to rest after sacrificing herself to save a boy from some rubble during a Hulk battle. But in this story, she lives, and the Hulk and Jarella are shrunk again so they can go and live happily ever after, on the subatomic level in the Kingdom of Kai. Now, Kai, for some reason, is very medieval / Roman / ancient in general, and Hulk, who now possesses his full intelligence, becomes king alongside Jarella. Soon, a dark plot by some dark gods and their dark minions rears its ugly head, and Hulk, alongside a group of other subatomic barbaric heroes, goes to thwart them, facing off against a second savage Hulk that seems to have just been dispatched in like 2 comic panels. And that's where it ends. I'm assuming Hulk just stays subatomic and never returns to Earth, living as a microscopic barbarian for the rest of his life. Please check out this story. Number 3. Doom! Sorry. What would a good guy version of one of the strongest, most quotable, and most villainous villains in the pages of Marvel look like? Well, in issue 22 of What If, we get to see just that. When the Victor Von Doom of this universe discovers Reed Richards looking over his experiment notes, uninvited, He instead invites Reed to come help him out, which I think a true scientist would do. With Reed's help, he's able to contact his mother in the afterlife and learns of his royal blood. He trains in the advanced technology and mystical arts of an order of monks in Tibet and in the darkest places of sorcery, and is granted, instead of his classic armor, this really sweet golden armor evocative of knights. I think he looks pretty cool, but that's just me. He uses his knowledge to free his mother's soul from the realm of Mephisto, and uses his technology and sorcery to free his kingdom from an oppressive ruler. And all goes really well, until Mephisto comes back demanding the soul of his lover Valeria in exchange for the freedom of his people. Then he battles Mephisto once every year to try and save his love. It was almost a happy ending. Number 2. Spider Actor. A second Spider-Man what if on this list? Oh my. In this what if number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life. That simple act robs Peter of the lesson of the responsibility of having great power, and instead he turns to a life in the public eye. Now, as an actor, Peter turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation almost at any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a little bit. Well, it wasn't really that cool. When JJ exposes him to the public though, we see a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man, when he threatens him and eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite him when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. It is only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn that old power and responsibility thing. But man, Peter's a bit of a snob this way, I don't like it. Number 1. Fantastic Four. In the very first What If comic, the question that is posed is pretty simple. What if, instead of rejecting Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four instead let Spider-Man join? Marvel's most popular family adopting Marvel's favorite hero? A match made in heaven. The Fantastic Five go on to fight crime and supervillains. That is, until the battle with Namor the Submariner. In this alternate reality, at the end of this battle, Sue Storm feels kind of cast to the wayside, with more focus being put upon Peter and the other members of the team, and she leaves with Namor and becomes his bride. It completely stops the marriage of Reed and Sue from ever happening, which is just a weird, unnatural world to see. We don't like it. But life goes on, and the new Fantastic Four featuring Spider-Man go on with their lives. But now we don't get a Franklin or Valeria Richards, and I mean, they're pretty important now, so I don't know, let me know in the comments what other fallout you think would happen with Sue Storm being replaced by Spider-Man on the Fantastic Four. It's seriously an interesting question.